Blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. As we do each time we air this program, it's time to cover a few different topics that have been in the mainstream media lately. The theme of today's show is, are you paying attention yet? Because we cover a lot of different ground. And by the end of this presentation, my hope is that you will be even more firm in your commitment to think clearly and independently about any information that's coming at you. And that would include anything that I'm saying to you as well, because really, it's getting harder and harder for people to sift fact from fiction, especially if you go through mass media sources to get most of your information. You got to be willing to do your own homework, or you are going to be led by the nose to a number of different conclusions that may or may not reflect reality. So this is a headline, actually a couple of headlines that really grabbed some attention. Washington Medical Board says Idaho Dr. Ryan Cole peddled false COVID-19 claims. Dr. Cole has been under attack now for at least the last year or so. And primarily, the charges or the complaints against him have been that, well, he went contrary to the consensus of the medical establishment. In fact, this headline from Idaho Press is just one of them. Here's another headline, this one from KTVB. Washington Medical Commission sends statement of charges against Dr. Ryan Cole. The subheadline, the WMC alleges Dr. Ryan Cole, a Boise area pathologist, made misleading statements about COVID-19 and treated patients beneath the standard of care. I mean, this sounds pretty serious, right? This is not the kind of thing you would want to shrug off, but I do have to ask this one pesky question, because I've seen this on Twitter. People jump into, well, he's harmed patients. Okay, where's the harm? Where's the complaint of the harm? Can you show the patients that were actually harmed? And, does that fall under medical malpractice? Is it malfeasance? Because this looks a lot like they're just really upset that he didn't click his heels and do exactly whatever the establishment was saying needed to be done. Let's take a quick look at one of the articles here. This is from idahopress.com. Cole made false and misleading statements related to COVID-19 pandemic vaccines, treatments, and masks, according to the Washington Medical Commission statement of charge. Look, there's a lot of stuff out there that was being systematically silenced and erased because it was called misinformation, particularly relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm talking things like, for instance, let's talk about how about, here we go, back to the camera here. How about when every death was being counted as a COVID death? Well, this person died in a motorcycle accident, but you know what? We tested him and he had the COVID virus in his body. Therefore, it counts as a COVID death. The CDC is now starting to walk that back just in the last week or so. Well, we may have miscounted, or we may have inflated the count of these COVID deaths. Really? Well, it's not like there weren't a few people calling you out on that over the last couple of years. It's becoming harder and harder to deny. Why would they do such a thing? I know some will jump to, well, it's the World Economic Forum and it's this big conspiracy. But I don't know if it's any of that, but I do know this. Some very perverse incentives were offered to hospitals that reported COVID deaths. And those incentives included a fair amount of government money flowing to them. In the name of emergency relief, we know you're understaffed and overworked. So it was in the hospital's interest to report as many deaths as possible as COVID. One of the most interesting things is if you look at the number of flu deaths prior to 2020 versus 2020 through, say, 2022, very interesting to see how the flu almost disappeared there for a year or so. And then, it finally came back last year, but I don't think there was the money to be made. So if that sounds too conspiratorial, I don't know, maybe it is, but you have to admit that's a pretty strange thing. Well, what about some of these other complaints here? Let's see, treatments. Oh, remember when we were told ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, among other things, why you couldn't prescribe that? Why couldn't they? Because the mRNA vaccine could not be released under its emergency use authorization if there were some kind of effective treatment. Now, I can speak from experience because I have used ivermectin to deal with COVID symptoms. I've talked to a number of people who have personally done this too. I understand that's anecdotal, but my point is it really does work, or at least it appears to. Symptoms were lessened within a matter of hours and, in fact, gone within a matter of days. Am I saying that it cured it? No. I don't really understand how it works other than my understanding is ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine as antiviral medications. They make it much more difficult for the virus to replicate itself, and so it can't overwhelm your body. Now, compare this to remdesivir and putting people on ventilators. How many people died under those approved treatments? Thousands. Can they show that people were dying because someone was using these alternative treatments? I don't think so. So if this is what, and by the way, that is one of the complaints. Well, this Dr. Cole, he prescribed ivermectin to people. Yes, there were a number of doctors who did that, even when they were threatened by their various medical boards. Don't you dare do this. It wasn't a matter of, well, you're doing harm to the patient or you're putting leeches on them or something like this. It was a matter of there is consensus, and for whatever reason that consensus was, it was not based in the doctor-patient relationship. It was based in there's going to be top-down control. There is going to be absolute dogmatic obedience to what we say or else. By the way, masks, same thing. Now, I don't know if you have ever done this yourself, but if you have a box of N95 masks, take a look on the box itself. Notice if it says or doesn't say anything about this mask is not intended to prevent the transmission of virus. Most boxes will say that. So my point is, all the mandates about vaccines, all the mandates about you can't buy ivermectin or you're stupid if you do or you should wear a mask everywhere you go, none of it helped. They were all for naught. How do we know this? Because just about everybody got the virus anyway. But here we have the Washington State Medical Commission coming after Dr. Cole because he was bucking the trend. Now look, if he harmed people, that's one thing, and he should be held accountable if he actually harmed people. If he just did not march in lockstep with whatever this board said, that's a very different matter, and it seems to me the board may be overstepping its boundaries. Look at this. Cole's public statements about COVID-19 were, quote, harmful and dangerous to individual patients, generated mistrust in the medical profession. Please. The medical profession screwed itself by the way that it treated people and the way it became this dogmatic hive mind that dictated to doctors you can't counsel with your patients on an individual basis. You do what we say or else. And of course, it also negatively impacted public health, which was out of its lane and needed to be called into question and had widespread negative impact on the health and well-being of our communities. Okay, I'd like to see them quantify that. Exactly how many people, were involved in super spreader events because of Dr. Cole. I'm guessing that's going to be a little bit tougher to quantify. Oh, by the way, Representative Thomas Massey points out the CDC now is admitting mRNA shots can cause myocarditis and blood clots. They also admit natural immunity is real and concede that the shots don't prevent infection or spread of the virus. Weren't those all the reasons that were being used to justify why you will take this thing? We will make you take this thing or lose your job or lose your ability to move about freely in society, to travel, to shop, to dine. His point is, therefore, COVID vaccine mandates are immoral and unethical, even according to the government. So end them all now. Now, it seems to me that perhaps Dr. Cole was simply standing up for the right reasons a little bit ahead of time. Can we expect this Washington State Medical Board to apologize to him when the truth comes out that maybe he wasn't really off base? Again, if he actually harmed someone, if they can show that, he really harmed somebody. I see a lot of conjecture out there. I see a lot of people claiming, yes, he did. But that's not what the complaint says. That's not what the complaint is about. The complaint is he didn't go in lockstep with the dogma. So this leaves people wondering, or at least it would leave, I would hope, thinking people wondering, all right, well, Brian, how exactly are we supposed to handle a pandemic when it comes along? I'm glad you asked. In fact, actually, I want to refer you to some comments made by Kent McManigal. These were written in 2009. Do you remember back when, swine flu or H5N1 or whatever it was that was going around was causing a little bit of panic? Okay, here's what Ken had to say. With a pandemic, people should be allowed to seek treatment from whoever they trust, using any medications they wish without government intervention. Government help has a history of making things worse by not foreseeing the unintended consequences. Yeah, like sending patients to nursing homes and putting them on respirators, that kind of unintended consequences. He says, innovation is crushed under the government's regulations and by its FDA. No one ever talks about the people who died while the FDA wraps new treatments in a mummy of red tape and backroom deals. Rationed by a broken licensing scheme towards the ones who play politics well. Then you have the pharmaceutical company / government partnership. If pharmaceutical companies develop a vaccine, many people would choose to buy it. If it really works as advertised, the vaccinated people would have nothing to fear from those who chose other methods. I think Kent McManigal is right on the money here. And again, he did not write this in response to COVID. This is something he wrote back in 2009, but it holds up rather well today. And actually, it comports rather well with how pandemics were handled prior to COVID, which was you identify who the most vulnerable population is. In this case, it would be people over the age of 70 or people who have very serious comorbidities, compromised immune system because they're on chemotherapy, diabetes, heart disease, these kinds of things. Those are the people who should be most careful about catching the virus. In other words, they should probably be staying at home or at least limiting their contact with other people in order to protect themselves. As for everybody else, the ones who are not at such great risk, and please keep in mind, those who were infected with the COVID-19 virus still had a survival rate of 99.7%. That's pretty impressive. Hardly worth shutting down people's livelihoods, hardly worth having people beaten and locked up by police, hardly worth this crusade now to punish Dr. Ryan Cole because he wasn't going along with what the hive mind, the Borg, was telling him he had to. Why did we throw away nearly 100 years, actually it was 100 years plus, of pandemic response knowledge? I can't answer that question confidently other than it sure looks like because it appeared to be a good excuse for a power grab by people who desperately wanted to assume control. And once they got it, look how unwilling they are to let loose of it. It's interesting too that the Idaho medical boards, who also have had complaints about Dr. Cole, have not seen fit to strip him of his license or otherwise discipline him in some kind of a public setting. I don't know why the Washington State Board is doing it, but it sure has the appearance of something that's more vindictive and less in the name of we're just trying to protect the public health. It's more like we're trying to protect our egos or we're trying to protect our turf. And this guy wasn't playing, and he disrespected the gang. You got to be careful with that kind of stuff. All right, shifting gears, moving to another topic. Idaho House Committee prints bill to prohibit state from funding non-governmental events. Oh, you can hear the cries of outrage already beginning. This legislation would include events like LGBTQ plus pride events, rodeos, and church events. That's according to sponsor Representative Jason Monks. Now, I know right now, anything that doesn't pledge absolute fealty and bend the knee and kiss the ring of the LGBTQ plus cadre is considered hate. Well, this is hateful. In fact, the controversy over, the school policy in Caldwell that caused so much consternation and had parents showing up and loudly protesting, we don't want to integrate our restrooms so anybody who says, I identify as a girl can go walk into the girls' restroom. Now that's being called hate legislation. Just watch that word. It's a bogus predicate. It only is meant to instill fear or to instill doubt. Whoa, if it's hateful, it must be bad. But it never really quantifies. What exactly does that mean? By the way, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But as far as the state funding non-governmental events like this, I think that Representative Jason Monks is actually, I think he's on the right track here. Now, here's how he describes it. The Idaho House State Affairs Committee unanimously introduced a bill Thursday that would prohibit state agencies from donating or sponsoring non-governmental organizations. So unless it was approved by the governor, there might be exceptions, but that bill would include such events as LGBTQ plus pride events, rodeos, and church events, said Representative Jason Monks from Meridian, who sponsored the bill. Listen to his reasoning, though. He says, we have had events come up that we've heard about. The Pride event was one of those, obviously, that we were looking at that brought up other discussions that talked about what if the state sponsors a rodeo. Monks told Idaho Reports after the hearing, is that the proper role for government? He says, in my opinion, it's not. It's taxpayer dollars. We shouldn't be putting our stamp of approval on any non-governmental organizations. Good as the cause may be, that's still not the role of government. He's right, by the way. And isn't it interesting? The LGBT community at one time just was looking for, hey, we just want We just want the right to exist and not be persecuted or, beaten or otherwise denied, the ability to be a part of society. But that's not what the LGBTQ plus community is about. This is about hardcore activism. This is about making sure that even people within the LGBT community who are not political activists are towing the line, and they're only saying they're chanting in unison or else. It's a very totalitarian state of mind, and frankly, it does not reflect what a number of people who identify as gay necessarily even want. Why do I say this? Well, look, it's a small sample, but I do know people who are gay, and that's just not how they live their lives. Their life is not a political statement. The majority of them, they just want to live their lives. They want to be left alone, which to me, that's absolutely their right. I think that's actually one of the best rights that any of us can exercise. The right to be left alone to pursue happiness in whatever means we deem is the best way to do it. And nobody should be interfering with that. But the LGBTQ plus mindset is much more like, oh no, we have to bring this to the children. We have to make sure that everybody's talking about it. I actually saw an editorial, and I didn't want to share this one just because I didn't have enough time to go into the detail for it. But it's a former school teacher writing an editorial. I think this one was in the I want to say it was in the Lewiston Tribune. And she's saying, well, the parents who were protesting at that Caldwell school board meeting, they had, 3 major objections. One was God made men and women. Therefore, this gender identity policy, it offends my religion. When my students see teachers respecting other students, it's not a matter of respecting other students. It's a matter of dragging things out, which really are better resolved in private, or at least dealt with in private, and putting them on display as if this is something everybody has to acknowledge. It's literally a case of the emperor's new clothes, where we're all expected to pretend that, oh no, that that girl with the 5 o'clock shadow, she really is a girl, even though, she was playing football for the high school team and was named Bob last year. Not everybody should have to participate in that fantasy. And it's not because, we need to pick on those who have gender confusion. That was one of the other things, it's a mental illness. I think it is. But that doesn't mean that we need to cater to and be drafted into somebody's fantasy. So why is it being pushed so hard by educators? Libs of TikTok has done a marvelous job of exposing those educators who use their classrooms not as a classroom where, look, we came here to learn and we're going to get some experience and a more well-rounded view of the world, but as indoctrination centers. I'm here to break whatever beliefs your parents instilled in you and show you that there's a better way. Well, by the way, you might be, transgender yourself, or you might be non-binary, or you might be gay, or whatever. That's taxpayer dollars. I know we're going to talk about vouchers and we're going to talk about school choice here in a moment. That's the big beef. All right, this is taxpayer dollars. Why would we use that to have everybody subsidize something that they don't agree with? Exactly. Why would we allow that to be promoted in the schools if it's something that's not only divisive, but even harmful to kids? Why do we want to bend their minds? Again, I don't necessarily buy into the idea, well, it's because they're groomers and they're trying to, recruit or find more, potential victims or partners, for down the road. For some people, that might be the case. I think really the biggest part is this is a chance to indoctrinate a captive audience with leftist ideology. Leftist ideology that requires you have to break everything that came before you can be taught the true way and, go out there and enforce the new normal and enforce, the new ideology, become a little member of the Red Guard or a little Red Star kid who's out there now waving a rainbow flag, as part of their duties. So let's talk for a moment about the school choice issue. It's a hot button issue right now. It's got people really concerned, mainly because there appears to be growing support. And there appears to be, and not just here in Idaho, but this is happening across the country. Parents want choice. Sometimes it's because I don't like what I see my kids being taught in government-run schools. It's getting way too politically correct, way too politicized. I don't want to have to subsidize that. I don't want to have my kids subjected to that. I don't agree with it. But, the people who are opposed to school choice Man, they have settled on the word voucher. That is their cuss word. I don't know if they took this to a focus group and said, okay, we were looking for your reaction. What one gives you the more visceral reaction? If we say choice, oh, well, obviously the pro-choice people are, no, that's a good word. We don't want to demonize that. Okay, what if we say vouchers? Okay, yeah, some people disagree with that. So now everything is a voucher, even though as the bills are being introduced and being considered, it's very clear these are not vouchers. They are education savings accounts. Yes, they may have some similarities, and yes, they do use taxpayer collected money taken from the taxpayers. But again, the idea is it's putting the parents in the driver's seat as far as deciding what to do with that taxpayer investment. All right, but this is very concerning to Luke to Luke Mayville. Keep this in mind when ESA voucher proponents see he's just trying ESA voucher. It's I guess he's just going to throw in voucher for whatever. It's like that stupid, insipid habit of every scandal becomes gate. Well, now it's voucher gate, according to Reclaim Idaho. When ESA voucher proponents claim that Idahoans are demanding school choice, he says, keep in mind, the truth is that grassroots support for vouchers is almost non-existent. Well, what about education savings accounts? I don't know. He's not being perfectly clear here. And interestingly enough, we polled these people who identify as conservative and very conservative, very reliant on labels. If you were to ask the question in an honest way, parents, would you like to have more say about how your child is educated? In other words, would you like to have a say as to whether it has to be within the state-run system or whether you would have other options to direct your child's education? Most parents would say, oh, I definitely want to be able to exercise the option that's best for my kid. Now, some of those parents may choose the state-run school system, or what we euphemistically call the public schools, but it's government-run schools. I like how my friend Connor Boyack puts this. Apparently, Utah is looking at something very similar. They're looking at the Utah Fits All Scholarship. This also, as I understand it, is a type of funding that will allow parents to have more say in how their kids are educated. So he posted this yesterday. It's up in the Utah Reps Committee. This bill will empower families to direct the taxpayer investment in their kids' education. I like how he put that, because this kind of hobbles people like Luke who want to turn it into it's just vouchers instead of just having one option to utilize it. Why is it that the proponents of government-run schools are so terrified of the prospect of any kind of competition? Why can't they countenance the idea that maybe competition would actually improve the school system? But no, all they can harp on is, well, they're just not funding it. They're not giving us enough money. They should be giving us more. But you're not producing the results. You're given tons of money. Last I heard, it's something like 60% of the state budget, but it's not having the desired effect. What's wrong with exploring some options? And the only reason that the opposition is there is because some of those options would allow parents to choose something other than a government-run school for their child. I think they ought to have that opportunity. Even if that money was taken from the taxpayers, even if it has to pass through government's hands, the parents need to be able to direct that taxpayer investment in their child's education. It's still impacting the public. You could still call it public education. The kids are going to be better off for it, but they'll actually have a choice as opposed to that rigid top-down teachers union controlled system that is so scared of anything offering a choice to its patrons. They're really scared of it. Like they know if people had a chance, if people got a taste of freedom, they might like it. We can't have that, can we? By the way, speaking of how public schools tend to publicize and politicize things that are not necessarily good. Look at this. KTVB reports a Brown Pride rally was held at Caldwell High School. Students spoke out for the right to wear Brown Pride clothing items. Students say it's cultural. The principal says it's associated with a gang. And apparently there is a gang that does use Brown Pride as, that's kind of their calling sign. Hey, to each his own. People who would see that as an offensive thing, I'm not into group identity. I think group identity politics is just another form of collectivism. It's the premise that, well, you're not really an individual. You're just part of a group. And the rights that you have or the amount of legitimacy that you have depends on which group you belong to. Now, in leftist thinking, of course, if you have membership in what could be identified as a victim group, one of the oppressed. And if you have brown skin, presumably that means you're part of the victim group. Well, then you have much more legitimacy than, say, someone who doesn't have brown skin. Case in point, now that brown pride rally was, police investigating possible hate crime at Caldwell High School. By the way, I have to give KTVB credit for at least saying possible hate crime. Other news organizations are just coming around, it's a hate crime. Someone defaced school property there at Caldwell High School. They sprayed graffiti. That's vandalism. That is a crime. But they wrote the words white power. And that is what's got the people who are politically correct absolutely up in arms. And how surprising. It comes just a couple days after students hosted a brown pride rally. Gee, I'm not saying that, one has anything to do with the other, but if you back people into a corner and keep telling them, you're racist, you're racist, you're racist, would you be surprised if at some point people push back and maybe act out in inappropriate ways? I don't believe, by the way, the whoever, spray painted the words white power on the school wall, I don't believe that we're talking about, this was Aryan nations, man. This was the Aryan Brotherhood coming in to, represent. It was kids, and it was kids misbehaving. And this harkens back to a few years ago down in the Salt Lake area. Some kids at a ball game apparently had a pillowcase, and one of them put it over his head, and he had a little pointed looking thing, and that became a full-blown hate crime investigation. The Southern Poverty Law Center, the professional alarmists, sent out their best men to help indoctrinate the school and hold counseling for the students and for the teachers and the administration to make sure that no more hate crimes were committed. It was kids being stupid. And this graffiti, while it is a crime, that's something that is a criminal offense. That's all it is. Okay, the hate designation is supposed to keep us alarmed. Oh no, the extremists really are taking over. I don't think that's necessarily the case. But of course, you can count on the media to milk it for all it's worth. Fear is how they get people fired up, and they want you to believe the enemy's at the gates. And this is how the psychopathic world of politics and narrative creation works. There's nothing so true that the agenda setters and their tame media are forced to report it. On the contrary, the media will routinely deny the undeniably obvious every day, year after year, for as long as they need or want to. This is Kit Knightley, writing for offguardian.org, who points out the truth has no relevance in their lexicon unless it also serves some other purpose. They tell stories of convenience. They report only what is of service to those stories, which is why you have to really be careful, especially when they start harping about our democracy. It's the dumbest thing anyone can say. Democracy is mob rule. Democracy is might makes right. Might meaning superior numbers. It's not something to be praised, advocated, fetishized, or imposed on others. Now, I'm going to leave you with one little bit of advice, and this is actually, I think, some of the best advice that I've seen. I, too, spend way too much time on Twitter, and I get caught up in some of the various personalities and some of the back and forth that's going on. But where is your attention? Are you paying attention to things that actually matter? My friend Dustin Hurst with the Idaho Freedom Foundation says, so, you're all wrapped up in the Crowder, Daily Wire drama. Cool, real smart. Do you know what your legislature did today? No? Then shut up about conservative drama and pay attention to stuff that matters. That really is the quest before us, and that's the problem that needs to be solved. Like I say, I get caught up too. I punch the tar baby and stick to it and go, oh crap. And, I've been sitting here scrolling for 30 minutes and I'm caught in another Twitter debate. But if you're paying attention to the stuff that really matters, that's going to include what exactly are the people you elected to represent you doing? Are they representing you? Are they representing your values? Are they representing principles of proper government? How's your wallet? I think that's where a lot of people really tend to feel the most impact is, what are they doing, that impacts my wallet? Pay attention, but make sure you're paying attention to the right things. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.